let yourself be the initiatress and hold that anchor in that space in your relationship. And like I said, the vast majority of the time, your partner actually comes along with you much more if you embody it and choose it, rather than if you're sitting there being like, well, I'm not going to do it until you do it, or you say it's okay. That's a really big piece. And the other one is not learning to take deep self-responsibility for our emotions and our actions. There's still this like subtly conditioned desire to feel so safe with our partners, and partnership should be safe. But safety starts within how we hold ourselves, how we love ourselves, how we take responsibility for getting our own needs met internally first and foremost. And this to me is being a queen or royal sovereign of who we are. This to me is really looking at, if I want needs met, how do I internally love my inner child? How do I internally take care of my sexuality? How do I hold my heart in a beautiful way? And yes, I want to be in a partnership where my partner can meet me in that, where my partner can shower me with love, where my partner can be safe. But as long as I'm subtly saying, I won't feel safe until you make me feel safe. I won't feel like a wild, ecstatic sexual being until you make me feel like a wild, ecstatic sexual being. We're going to be locked in this sort of cycle forever. And the most insidious thing that thing does is it gives us an excuse to play small over a lifetime, because we're waiting for our partner to make us feel a certain way. We're waiting for our partner to choose a certain thing for us to give ourselves the permission. And I haven't seen that works. And B, the most successful partnerships I've seen, the leader of consciousness is owning their path and their truth, taking responsibility for that, and their partner is rising and meeting them. And then after that happens, we tend to rise each other and continue to meet each other. And that's how we get on an upward spiral of relating. But when we're sitting there saying, I'm not going to rise until you rise, what happens is we start actually going on a downward spiral.
Welcome my guest, Layla Martin. Layla is a visionary rebel who teaches sexuality, relationships, self-love to hundreds of thousands of people across the globe. Her devoted study of tantra for over 18 plus years, along with her sexuality studies at Stanford University, has informed her unique teaching process that combines mystical practices with the utmost up-to-date scientific approaches to healing trauma and transforming the nervous system. With the information, tools, and practices Layla offers, you'll discover how to experience exquisite sex, shameless self-love, and incredible depths of intimacy in your relationships. Her programs have taught over 10,000 women, men, and non-binary people through her Vita method of using breath, sound, movement, meditation, and energy awareness to awaken their sexuality and reclaim their power and worthiness. Well, Layla Martin, I am just so honored to talk to you about such an important subject that is actually not really talked about in society. It's kind of like shamed, put behind, the doors. And I know we're going to bring a lot of light to the subject around sex, sexual healing, sexual trauma, also creating epic sex in our life, and introducing all the aspects of how to do that. So I can't wait to dive deep into the subject. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, it's so amazing to be here with you. Thank you for having me.
And I know you have been titled as the Headmistress of Pleasure. So of course, that's going to be a subject in this interview today. But first I want to hear about your journey. Like, what drove you to have such a passion in pleasure, sexual healing, tantra, and everything you teach to others today? What led you here?
It's still mysterious to me, but I got led very young. So I was raised Catholic. And when I was 11, I was like, this feels like if I want to be a good person, I want to be a good person, not on threat of eternally burning in hell, but because my heart is in it. And I was like, I'm going to seek other options. So back literally about 12, 13, I went to the local library, which is what you did.
Yes, back then.
I was in the suburbs of Colorado, and and I researched every world religion, and I truly, in my heart, felt so resonant with Hinduism. It was a very strange thing to do. It wasn't cool back then. Like yoga hadn't swept the nation. It wasn't like the thing to do. Like nowadays that would be like maybe an obvious thing to do, to like join yoga, things like that. And so I just had this deep calling. I knew that there was so much wisdom in that tradition somehow. And so when I was 14, I found a trip in the back of the New York Times, and I told my parents, I was like, there's a trip to Asia, please send me. It went to Tibet, India, Nepal. And the first place God bless them, they let me go. And they were like, look, if you get straight A's, if you do well in school, we will support you to go on this summer trip with other people my age. And so I got to go to Tibet, India, and Nepal at age 15. And the first place I went of my own volition was Kashmir, which is the birthplace of Kashmir Shaivism, which is one of the most detailed, exquisite, elevated traditions in the tantric path. So I started very young and went to Stanford when I was 17, and just knew that I wanted to live these experiences. And so at Stanford, I studied sexuality, immunology, and behavior in the human biology department. But I was sitting there being like, this isn't the living experience that I crave. So I went back to Asia when I was 18 and basically found the first Kundalini practices, did my first Vipassana, started studying Tantra at 18 and spent about 10 years on and off in Asia after that. And Tantra is at its heart a spiritual path, not a sexual path. And I was always uniquely interested in both because I had experienced sexual abuse from my biological father. I was largely raised by my stepfather. And so there was this aching longing to heal my sexual soul and to heal my body. But there was an equal and possibly even more powerful longing for spiritual awakening. And so in my path, I was always interested in both. And classical Tantra is much more a path of spiritual awakening. And Neo-Tantra is much more a path of spiritual awakening through sexuality. And so I studied both for about 10 years and have been practicing both for about 18 years now.
Wow. Well, let me ask you, as far as you mentioning is it called Tantra, and then also traditional? So traditional has been around for ages and ages. Has sexual Tantra, the path of Tantra, the Tantra, has that been existing for as long as traditional?
Yes, great question. So it's neo, like new.
Neo.
Like,
okay,
yeah, totally, like the Matrix. So it's fascinating. The roots of classical Tantra, many people will say, and one of my key female tantric mentors would say, like, it goes back thousands and thousands of years into the most ancient practices, the most ancient way of being in the body, worshiping the goddess as everything. Those roots are very, very deep. And scholarship will say that Tantra really began to formulate as a religion, as a philosophy, largely in India around 500 AD, and then it spread throughout all of Asia. So what's fascinating is classical Tantra has, it's really the philosophical system that birthed a lot of what we think of as like modern spirituality, even in the US. So everything is one. That's a core teaching of classical Tantra. The idea that your body, what you do with your body can change your consciousness. So yoga, right? If you move your body into a different pose, your consciousness changes. That's actually a tantric teaching. Things like the way that you breathe can impact how your awareness, right? It can support you to awaken. That's also a tantric teaching. So what's fascinating about Tantra is it kind of peaked around 1000 AD in its influence, sort of wrapped up around 1500 AD. It's not gone, but because of waves of Islamic invasion, British invasion, it was very much squashed in the Indian subcontinent, but it impacted the religions of Tibet, of Japan, of China. It was a very influential system. So it's left this profound and powerful legacy, not only throughout Asia, but now spreading throughout the world. And it's, in my opinion, such an advanced and such a profound spiritual tradition that is so powerful for so many people to study, because it's one of the only spiritual traditions that doesn't say that to to be divine and to be enlightened, you have to reject the world. So it's a very, at its core, it's about finding goddess and divinity in everything, and especially the places where we have the hardest time finding it. So that's why in classical tantra, even though sex is a very small part of the classical tradition, it's an enlightenment tradition about kundalini, chakra work, breath work, using mudras and yantras and mantras, all kinds of classical Indian technology to become spiritually awakened. There are these teachings which are very unique to the tradition, that if you want to awaken quickly, and that's kind of one of the unique selling points of the tantric tradition, get enlightened in this lifetime, like that's the tagline, is go where you have the most resistance, the most fear, and in some ways the most egoic conditioning. And so you can find in the classical traditions work with sexuality as a way to liberate oneself. And so the neo traditions, which started birthing really in the last 100 years, and a lot of them originated in Asia. So you could say Osho is one of the originators of neo tantra. Mantak Chia, in some ways, he's teaching the Taoist system, but it has a lot of this neo flavor of reinventing a system for the modern era. And what they kind of birthed was this emphasis that if you want to spiritually awaken, one of the fastest ways to do it is through your sexuality, because it's in our sexuality that we carry our deepest traumas, our deepest shames, our deepest repressions. And so if you want to go to the heart of where you're the most restricted and the most limited, you can get the fastest level of awakening. It's like the most energy is coiled up around our sexuality. So if you want to liberate that energy, you go straight to the heart of your sexuality. And so a lot of people think it's like, oh, the neo-tantric paths are this horrible distortion of the classical paths. They can be sometimes. People really misinterpret Tantra, but they were also innovated largely by Indian and Asian teachers to be able to be very appropriate for the modern era and to help people unwind and activate their consciousness in powerful embodied ways in a way that suits people in these days. So I think it's actually the most powerful to understand classical tantric philosophy and have roots in it. And also I have a lot of respect for the neo-tantric traditions because they're very effective for people in the modern era.
And obviously you became so passionate about it for a reason, because you saw the benefits of practicing it and implementing it into your life, I assume. And you touched on, which thank you for explaining all that. It's very fascinating. I think a lot of people don't know the depth of what Tantra is. So it's beautiful to hear it from your perspective, learning so much about it. So you touched on the sexual trauma. And if I could kind of pull this out a little bit, because you talk about go where the pain is. And a lot of people have it wrapped up in our sexuality. And I think sexuality, even these days, after so much has been revealed to us, if you want to say, and, so many people are seeking this type of knowledge, let me focus on sexual healing for a second. So you experiencing sexual trauma and you were seeking to heal that, was it your path through Tantra where it really evolved and you were able to heal those parts of you that were wounded? Or how did you actually heal yourself through the trauma you experienced?
Yes. So it was doing the classical and neo-tantric work gave me the key insight to healing my sexuality that was so necessary and that I feel is so important for people to understand. Because a lot of the time, so I couldn't have an orgasm. I felt really numb when I was with different lovers. I felt really unworthy. I had so many disgust feelings in my body that I literally would just shut down sexually, right? And so in sort of mainstream society, because I didn't know any better, my automatic reaction was to say, there's something wrong with me, right? Like, I'm not good enough. I'm sexually broken. I don't have the right lovers. I can't attract the right lovers because there's something wrong with me, right? It goes back to me. Like, I'm flawed in some way, shape, or form. And we even have language to reflect this. Like, I'm frigid. I'm sexually broken. I'm, it's just all this sort of, there's so much shame around being fully sexually expressed, especially as a woman. And then there's so much shame around not being sexual enough, right? It's like damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of thing. Right. And so the key insight from the tantric teachings that was so valuable was you're not able to have the kind of sex you want, not because you're broken or flawed or don't have the right lever. You're not having the kind of sex you want because you're terrified of sex. There's actually fear in your system. And that fear is creating deep contraction physiologically in your pelvic floor, in your womb space, in your heart. And so when you go to have sex, your body is so contracted and there's so much fear, and that's so uncomfortable to feel. And there's actually so much disgust in there that you're just going numb. And so when I'm numb, my only option really is to start to perform. So then sex starts to feel performative and hollow, and like I'm doing it for my partner, and now I'm doing it because I don't want my partner to leave. And so sex kind of gets farther and farther away from the core of me. And in some ways, it's like I'm feeling less and less good about sex because it's kind of hollow, it's numb, and it's the performance feels bad to my system. So over time, my option then is to just lose my desire and be like, well, I don't want to have sex. This like, what's here for me? And so a lot of people can really relate to that journey, whether they've been sexually abused or not. It was more pronounced in me because of the depth of my fear and disgust. So what I learned as I was studying that was so powerful was, oh, okay, if I want to be a fully expressed sexual being, if I want to have the kind of orgasms that are mind-blowing, if I want to have the kind of intimacy I crave, it's not about trying to find the best lover. It's not about becoming, learning like amazing blowjob tips that can be helpful, but like that's not going to solve this body of pain and fear I'm living in. Then I need to work on my fear, on my disgust, on my numbness. But what happens most of the time, because of how most of us are raised and conditioned, is when I realize I have sexual fear, when I realize I have sexual numbness, I then turn on myself and start saying, how can you be so numb? How can you be so afraid? And it's this layers and layers of judgment. So from there, it was both working with modern systems for healing the nervous system, for creating safety, for integrating, being trauma informed and being able to release trauma in a safe and loving way. But also one of the fundamental teachings of Tantra that's so beautiful is everything is consciousness. And in the most left-handed paths, everything is goddess consciousness. So in learning the classical teachings alongside healing myself sexually, it was like, oh, my fear is alive. My fear is a teacher. My numbness is a teacher. And so many women and gender nonconforming individuals are so hard on themselves for feeling numb sexually, but your body only feels numb when you feel unsafe to feel what you're feeling. And we don't usually think of sexuality as like needing this foundation of safety, but we do. So anybody who's facing numbness, it's not like, oh my gosh, I'm so numb, there's something wrong with me. It's my body doesn't feel safe. So how do I create the safety to be able to feel what I need to feel? And for most of us, when we create that safety, we start feeling the unfelt things first. And that is usually fear, disgust, pain, shame, judgment, all of that. And because of the way we're socialized to think about sex, which is it should just be pleasurable, it should look like what you see in porn or Hollywood, and you better have an orgasm so your lover feels good. We like don't have this space to feel afraid. Like we don't have a space to feel pain inside of our sexuality. But in my experience, we need that space so that we can integrate and heal those layers. And underneath those layers is our greatest sexual experiences, our greatest sexual expression. And so a lot of people think I need to get to sexual ecstasy and full body orgasms and mind-blowing tantric experiences through trying to achieve those, when really the journey is down and in. It's through the body. It's often through the shadow sides of our sexuality. And from there, we birth a much more authentic, centered, empowered sexuality. But that takes time. It takes work. It takes kind of understanding the journey to be able to stay committed to it.
Yeah, it's obviously this is what you help women and men even heal these sexual wounds and really deepen their connection with their body and sexuality. And why is there so much shame around sexuality? Why do we even have these if you want to say our beliefs around sexuality, that it's either something to shame or something to, suppress? Like why is it even existing?
It's a great question, Erica, and I have contemplated it a lot. So, we can go back. One of the traditions I've looked, and the cultures I've looked the most at is ancient Europe. So what was going on in ancient Europe about 3,000 to 5,000 years ago was beautiful goddess traditions, high priestess traditions, and even in Northern Africa, the Middle East, right? These holy centers of goddess power. And that was happening in India as well. It was almost a global phenomenon as far as I know of the cultures that we really have a strong archaeological record for. And what's so cool is there's these caves that line the Mediterranean from 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, roughly. And like high priestesses sat in those caves and did some of the most sacred goddess worship. And at that time, at least as far as I've seen in the archaeological record, and I'm not a historian, but I've looked really into this, there wasn't a lot of war. There wasn't a lot of, they don't find like warfare tools and things like that. So there was this kind of sacred path. And there's a lot of sort of understanding that in the Isis tradition and the traditions of Babylon, it's like the magic that was practiced with the high priestesses included sexual energy. It included this sort of divine aliveness. So the goddess traditions, and especially some of the more wild goddess traditions, so Cybele, Hecate, there were Isis. It was the way to get to the goddess was through ecstasy, through expression of deep emotions, through ecstatic dance. And even though this is like very scary for a lot of people, the word orgia comes from the Greek word for mystical rites. So even using sexuality and sexual practices as a way to get to divine states of communion with God or goddess. And so when it actually happened pre-Christianity, but there was this sweep of patriarchy that started to come through in the religions. Greek society is very patriarchal. Roman society is very patriarchal. And it really started to shut down and judge a lot of these traditions. And there became this kind of battle between the goddess traditions and the more patriarchal god traditions. And that sort of seeded through Judaism, Christianity, Islam, which had massive impacts on the entire region. And all over, but I've especially studied this in Europe, it was like the goddess traditions were kind of, you could think of them as the competition. Like if religion is a brand and a company and you want to get as many followers as possible, right? There's this recognition that the goddess traditions were the competition, right? So what kind of PR do you need to discredit them? And this goes hand in hand with patriarchy. It was both patriarchal and a kind of religious competition. Well, you make all of the practices in the goddess traditions demonic, evil, the things that bad people do. So that's exactly what happened, right? Ecstatic dance, demonic, right? You don't do that. Being in a cathartic state of ecstasy, absolutely not, right? Having a sexual practice, hell no, right? So it's not an accident that these parts, which used to be sacred pathways to goddess union, became not only like tisk tisk, but like you're going to burn in hell if you do that. So not only that, but eventually over the next couple hundred years, we'll actually kill you if you do any of those things. Like if you were to try and practice ecstatic dance in the forest to unify with the goddess consciousness of nature, like you'll be burned at the stake. So it started as a kind of religious competition and it became more and more and more violent, right? And more intense. And this actually, even though I'm using Europe as an example, it happened globally, right? So witches, shamanesses, all like they were systematically deprived of their power. A lot of Indian gurus and teachers and the feminine paths also got, taken over by patriarchy. And so that's one hand. And then on the other hand, you had this rise of patriarchy where controlling female sexuality became like a deeply vested interest. And even the idea of like monogamous marriage, like that's a new thing in Europe. Like it only started happening in like 900 AD. And then in 1200, it was like you have to be monogamous. You have to be married for life. And okay, we'll let the men cheat a bit, but like, absolutely not. Like a woman will die if she goes outside of monogamous marriage. So there became this deeply ingrained agenda to control female sexuality. So you could understand who was the father, so you could pass on economically your inheritance to who you knew were your children, not somebody else's children. And so it became this deeply ingrained system. And there's a lot of threads of sexual shame, of disgust around sexuality that show up early on in Europe, especially in the religious traditions. And as that got passed on, my experience is the more that people are repressed, the more that they will repress others, especially around sexuality. So what started as like a repression of people became this sort of intergenerational trauma of, I find my sexuality now disgusting and shameful because of religious tradition, because of patriarchy. So when my daughter comes of age, you better believe if she has any flare up of her own sexuality, I'm going to shame her. I'm going to judge her. I'm going to control her, because that's how I have to hold myself. And in many ways, that's what women needed to do to survive. So we started judging and shaming and controlling each other, and then ourselves. And that's how you perpetuate a system of trauma. So one of the things that's fascinating to me and tragic, honestly, is that even though we're living in this sexual revolution, liberatory era, right? Especially since the 1960s here in the US, we are carrying a legacy in our nervous system, in our bodies, of those thousands and thousands of years. Like, that's gotten passed on in our physiology, in the way that we experience pleasure and orgasm, literally at a cellular level. And so even though so many of us want these amazing sexual experiences, like we read all the time that now that orgasm is healthy for us and we should have an orgasm and we should be having this amazing sex, the actual signature inside of us is of those past few thousand years. And so to actually get to these original states of ecstasy requires the courage to undo that intergenerational shame and disgust that has been so passed on for so long. And then we had a really like upswing of shame and disgust in the last 200 years as well. So it's bad enough that we have this thousands of years legacy. And then especially in the 1800s, 1900s, it was like masturbation is the most disgusting, sinful thing you can ever do. Like Kellogg's cereal was invented to help people not masturbate basically in the morning by giving them something like so basic and dry that they would never think to touch their own genitals. Like, it got really intense in the Victorian era in England, which impacted the US. And so even more shame was heaped on people, even more judgment, even more disgust. So we've been like building this like giant cultural ball of sexual disgust and shame. And the last thing I'll say about it is, it's so crazy because we all know that orgasm is one of the most beautiful things we could ever experience. And if you ask people to describe their deepest state of orgasm and their deepest state of meditation, it's literally indistinguishable. It's some of the most beautiful things that we can ever experience, like looking into your lover's eyes, being in a state of ecstasy, open-hearted bliss and pleasure. Like, we know that's one of the most beautiful things a human can be doing. And yet culturally, we're like, shame, bad, wrong, hide, right? And like, what? It's crazy making.
Oh my goodness. Well, I love the history lesson you just gave us. It's so interesting because, like you said, it's so ingrained for years and years and years, and it's ever evolving, but it's kind of just, it's continues to domesticate us, like even from our parents teaching us that this is bad, whatever it may be, or our peers. So going into, I want to put aside the sexual trauma because that's a whole subject in itself. I really want to focus today on epic sex and what's the other epic sex and legendary love. I love how you state that on the top page of your website. So what does that mean to you? Like, what's the definition of epic sex and legendary love?
Epic sex is being able to have sexual experiences that just touch you to the core. It's like your soul is making love. Epic sex is definitely being able to get into powerful states of surrendered ecstasy. Epic sex is being able to grow and learn and evolve through your sexuality over time. And epic sex is really about being able to be so intimate and authentic and connected to who and what you are as you make love. So powerful. I also think it has a lot to do with learning to work with energy, learning to work with orgasm, the many different types of orgasms. It's just this epic path of sexuality. And legendary love to me is to be able to live as your highest self in love, in relationship. And that includes being brave, being authentic, being profoundly connected to your partner, and using tools and support so that you can be on a deep journey with one another, a deep journey in sharing your emotions, a deep journey in growing together. I think the paradigm of relationship that we're getting out of is relationship as survival, right? You pick a partner so that you have like a house and food and you can take care of your children. Totally. Like we definitely still need to survive, especially in the world that we're in. But I think a lot of us have been liberated to desire thriving together.
Yes.
And that thriving is this new concept. Actually, we forget that, but it's like, you didn't thrive in a marriage like 100 years ago. Like you just made a social economic bargain and then you did it until death did you part. Like that was marriage. And so we're kind of embarking on this new relational journey of what does it look like to grow together spiritually? What kind of tools and techniques do you need to be able to heal some of your deepest wounding imprints and your fears of intimacy and actually connect on such a profound level? Yeah, that you experience mythical, legendary love by being the best version of yourself in partnership or with lovers. And I think oftentimes we think we have to give up so much of ourselves to be in partnership. And I really feel and experience that there is another path that so many of us are hungry for.
So beautifully how you describe that. And of course, I think everybody that's probably listening to this seeks that, right?
Yeah.
That sounds euphoric, right? So going into depth of that, let's talk about the woman awakening that a goddess within us, that we feel maybe our sexuality is suppressed and that we're not in touch with that side. And it's been, gone for so long. How do we begin to awaken that sexuality in us again and really connect more to our sexual energy?
Yeah. So the basis of that and what I teach is having a regular pleasure practice. So having a pleasure practice is like going to the gym, but for your sexuality and your pleasure. And so it's anything from, it can literally be a 5-minute practice. It can be all the way up to 90 minutes if you're a real type A about your goddess awakening, which God bless those students. So there's this intentionality to making your pleasure and your sexuality something that you create a conscious container for, right? So it's like going to the gym is making a conscious container for your physical fitness, right? Or sitting down to an organic meal is making a conscious container for your health and well-being. So it's like, if you want to thrive in your sexuality and grow in your sexuality, you need a container in which to actually work through and connect to your sexuality. So I call that a pleasure practice. Then what do you do in a pleasure practice, right? Well, in many ways, it's working with your pleasure, your sensuality, and your sexuality in a very intentional way. And so there's lots of things, and this is so much of what I teach, that you can do in a pleasure practice. Anything from basic pussy breathing, right? Using breath work to activate different parts of your body, using breath work to clear and heal and integrate some of those layers that I was talking about, using breath work to learn how to melt cortical control so you can get into a powerful state of sexual surrender, right? That's just one example of some of the tools you can use. You can do something like use a jade egg or a yoni egg to open up your sexuality, to connect very deeply to your vagina, to be able to do, there's so many practices you can do with a jade egg or a yoni egg that can activate your energy system, that can wake you up to the deepest possible orgasmic potential. You can do practices like sex magic. And a lot of what I teach is the 5 holistic sex practices, where you really learn how to use your breath, how to use the way you sound, how to use the way you move, how to use your energy, and how to use mindfulness to fully activate and open your sexuality. And so in a pleasure practice, you're not just, fantasizing about the same thing that you usually do and getting off in the same way. That's masturbation. You're actually conscientiously going in and saying, okay, if I get real present with myself and use these tools and these practices, how does my sexuality evolve, awaken, grow over time? And so you start to understand that your sexuality is not this static thing. It's actually this living experience within you. And sex is more like a sport or an art in a lot of ways, that the more time you spend with it, understanding it, like the deeper your expression goes.
So you mentioned the jade egg. Can you kind of give us a little look into utilizing the jade egg or yoni egg and how that works to strengthen our, I guess you could say strengthen our pussy or whatever to heighten our pleasure, or how does it work?
Totally. So a jade egg or a yoni egg, it's basically an egg shaped object. So you can use jade, you can use different types of stone. We've actually started making ones of borosilicate glass, which is body safe to be used. And for those of you who know anything about the jade egg controversy, it's actually so fascinating because the only thing that anyone is arguing about is whether jade is safe for internal use or not. The actual practice is not dependent on using jade internally. So that's why we've been making borosilicate glass eggs, because that kind of glass is used internally and medically all the time. So it's absolutely body safe. Jade has been used internally in circulation, at least in the United States, for the last 50 or 60 years with no reported issues whatsoever. But I always like to give people options so that they can make the best choice for their own body. But the actual practice is that you put this egg inside of your vagina. And what's so powerful about it, right, is we know Kegels work, right? Like it's one of the few scientifically proven ways to have a better orgasm is to have a stronger pelvic floor. So doing a Kegel is going to get you a better orgasm. However, most of us, even though you read it, you're like, it's like, do your Kegels in the car, do it while you're at work or whatever. I have never like just randomly been like, oh, I'm going to do a Kegel. And maybe if I did like once or twice, I certainly don't remember to do it all the time, right? It'd be like, oh, just randomly do yoga on the floor every once in a while. And like, you're going to like, you'll awaken your yoga abilities. Like, no, you need a container and you need a focus, right? For many people in yoga, that's their mat, right? I go to my mat and that makes all the difference. If I didn't have a mat, how like it would be so much harder to do yoga, right? It's a very simple thing, but it makes such a difference. Yeah. It's the same thing. You can do all of these sexual practices without an egg in your vagina, but the egg in your vagina, it's like this tangible, connected experience. It's an object that kind of brings the focus to the practice. So using it as well on the most basic level. So there's very little sexuality research anywhere in the world, but especially in the United States. But one of the few proven things is called sensate focus. So the more that you build an ability to feel what you're feeling during pleasure and sexuality, the stronger your sexual experience is. So when you put an egg up your vagina on the most basic level, you're giving yourself this conscientious way to strengthen your pelvic floor and to start to feel what's really going on inside of your body, right? In the most simple egg practice, you can do some movement, some hip swivels, some activation of your pelvic floor, and then you can work with your pleasure. You can literally orgasm or touch yourself while the egg's inside, and even that has this kind of enhanced experience. So it's the most basic level. From there, you can actually train your body in sacred sexuality, and this is what we do in our vitasacredsexuality program, is there's an actual systematic methodology to be able to awaken full body orgasm, to be able to activate all of your chakras, to be able to do sex magic, to open your energy channels so that you have mystical states of sexual awakening, to literally become a high priestess through the power of your sexual energy. And so you can use a jade egg or a yoni egg and the practices that you do, again, using breath work, using sounding, using energy, using mindfulness, using movement, to open up your entire body. And the best system to really understand this is yoga, right? If you've never done yoga before, and I was trying to explain it to you of like, well, you move your body in different positions and you learn to use your breath and you learn to use sound through using mantras. And somehow this will bring you into this state of like peace and bliss and flow and connection. It'd be kind of like, it's hard to understand if you've never done it, but you can do the exact same thing with your sexuality and get these very deep and profound results.
Wow. And how does masturbation come in play to create more epic sex with your partner? Is that something you recommend women that they should be, besides doing these other practices, the breathwork, the yoni egg and all this? Do you recommend masturbation? Is that something that you feel kind of goes hand in hand with creating that container with your partner?
Yes to masturbation, but only if it's woke. That's
great.
Do all kinds of masturbation. So yes, it's really important actually to cultivate and develop your sexuality on your own and not just with your partner for two different reasons. The first is that every single time we have an orgasm or experience pleasure, we're actually training our nervous system to have an orgasm that way or to experience pleasure that way. So oftentimes, if we never have our own masturbation practice, our own pleasure practice, we'll just run the same orgasmic circuits or pleasure circuits that we learned when we were young, as children or as teenagers or as young adults. And so oftentimes when we never have our own pleasure practice, we're just kind of hitting the repeat button on whatever our parents taught us, on whatever our peers taught us, on whatever early sexual experiences we had. It's really hard to do sexual healing and sexual transformation when you're making love with your partner if you've never done it on your own, because it's already a lot. You're like, you're with your partner, what are they going to think? Is it, it's not always the most pleasurable, right? It's like, it's a whole thing to really open up to the depth of your sexuality with your partner. So when you're doing it on your own, you're able to learn how to do it. So when you come together with your partner, you're able to do it together much better, right? It would be like if you were going to play tennis, but you never practiced on your own. You get so much better at your skills by just banging the ball, right? Like over and over and over again over the fence. It's very similar with masturbation. Additionally, you give yourself more freedom when you're on your own, especially at first. True. To say, oh, wow, I'm afraid right now, or, oh, wow, I have this shame level right now. So you're able to discover so much about yourself. And additionally, we know this in relationship, but it's really hard to practice. We know that things work better when we show up as whole individuals. So if the only way that I can experience my sexuality is through you, I'm going to subtly feel like my pleasure is dependent on you. My orgasm is dependent on you. My fullest expression is dependent on you. When I have my own sexual practice, I know more about who I am as a sexual being, and then I can meet you. And there's something so much more mature about that. And in my experience, so much deeper as well. And so I really recommend, yes, I'm talking a lot in the context of female sexuality, but everyone. So, in our men's course or men's sexual mastery training, we teach men to do the same thing, to have a conscious masturbation practice, to really take that time to have a pleasure practice for themselves, because they also have so much that they need to rewire. Often watching porn, often, toxic masculine conditioning, often going really fast and hard and not slowing down and feeling. So when they have a pleasure practice, right? So powerful. And sometimes we feel threatened by our partner having their own pleasure practice, but really think about it. If you're heterosexual or bisexual, interested in men in any way, shape, or form, and your male partner was having a pleasure practice so he could slow down with you and feel you more and release some of the toxic messaging he got through porn and media around women, how powerfully he could then start to meet you in his sexuality in the bedroom in a different way. And it's unlikely that he's going to release, let's say, pornography conditioning while he's making love to you. It's almost like he needs that space. So I'm a big supporter of people taking their own space to do pleasure practices.
That's great to know. And that's great way, like sharing your perspective of each and how we should accept our own individual practice and why are we doing it, right? What's the benefit? So why would you say so many women fake an orgasm? And I know you shared ways that we can heighten and get to the point of having a natural orgasm, to be in that space to actually go there, right? Yeah. Why do you feel women feel they need to fake this orgasm and pleasure the man, and that it's all about them, and how to release that and allow, like, hey, I'm part of this equation. I want to get something out of this, and just let that be. How do we get to that space?
Well, we swung real hard as a culture from you shouldn't feel, as a woman, you should not feel pleasure. You are tolerating sex with your husband, right? In heteronormative society. And like a good girl is not having a wild orgasm, right? Madonna whore. Like if you're married to someone, if you're in a relationship, you better be the Madonna and a little bit shut down and just tolerating the sexual experience. And then part of the sexual revolution and part of the feminist liberation that happened in the 60s, 70s, and 80s was like, have an orgasm, have an orgasm, have an orgasm. And like, bless you, right? Like that was a good swing, but we swung hard in the other direction, and also gave, especially men, but everybody, regardless of gender, got this messaging. If you are a good lover, you will give your partner an orgasm. So part of this like orgasmic reclamation was like, women, you better have an orgasm, right? So get your vibrators. Like that was revolutionary in the 70s and 80s. That was a huge step. And, you know, we started to say to men especially, like your partner had better have an orgasm. And if they don't, you're not good enough, right? She's going to leave you for someone else. Like she's going to be sexually unsatisfied. She's going to cheat. So it's like, we've also given them this heavy emotional messaging that like, if your partner doesn't have an orgasm, there's something wrong with you. And not only is there something wrong with you, but like bad things are going to happen. So we've created this sort of egoic fragility in specifically a lot of men to feel like my partner had better have an orgasm or all these horrible things are going to happen. I'm not a good enough lover. So that pressure often means that women then in heterosexual relationships are feeling this overwhelming need to make their partner feel worthy, like a man, like he's pleasing them, right? And so we get into this kind of bargain of like, I will have an orgasm so that you can feel good about yourself. Totally understandable. But all that pressure to have an orgasm on top of everything I've already discussed, right? The underlying layers, the numbness that can happen, the performance, all of that, it puts us as women into the prefrontal cortex where orgasm does not happen. So when you're in your prefrontal cortex, which looks like, am I going to have an orgasm? Am I feeling enough? Is my partner satisfied? Am I going fast enough? This is all judgment. And in order to have deep orgasms with a partner, science has shown that that part of the brain, the judging, controlling, discerning brain, needs to go silent. So does the part of us that's worried about how we look, about how we're perceived. We actually need to go into a deep state of emotional and psychological surrender in order to have an orgasm. All this pressure to have an orgasm is counter to that neurologically and puts us into this state of like pressure, which makes it really hard, really hard to actually have an orgasm. So what are you going to do then? Well, you're just going to fake it, right? Like, what am I going to do? Make my lover feel like a loser? I'm so far from an orgasm. And oftentimes it's like, I just want this to be over. Like, let's like stop doing this. And so it makes sense on so many different levels. And the journey really that I would recommend for those two individuals is like for her to go in and figure out what's underneath the performance, what's underneath the numbness, what's really there, because everyone has a deep sexuality. I can say that without a doubt. Everyone has a deep sexuality and a deep sexual expression that they're capable of, regardless of how they want to express it or not. And for men, a lot of the time, their training is really to stop emphasizing orgasm, which makes you goal-oriented, which makes you future-oriented. Again, it's putting you in prefrontal cortex where sexy experiences do not happen. You cannot think your way to the best sex of your life. I wish we could, but we cannot. And it takes you out of your body into this kind of controlling part of your brain. What does it look like to be so in the moment, so connected mind, body, and soul to your lover, so able to connect to pleasure that you're so in the moment with your lover and so connected to them that you get out of your thinking mind into your body, into the deeper parts of your nervous system. That's where surrender and the best sex happen. So ironically, all this pressure to have an orgasm is counter to us having the best possible orgasms. And that's part of the training is how do you get out of thinking about your to-do list? How do you get out of trying to have an orgasm quickly and get into your body? But getting into your body is to understand that your body is not just going to feel pleasure. Your body is going to feel all kinds of things. And what this does is opens up sex out of just being about pleasure into being a multidimensional experience.
And would you say that tantra is kind of that container to learn how to get into that body experience where you're releasing all those thoughts and to-do lists and all that? Would you say that's the path to learn?
Exactly.
Okay, perfect. And so what would you say to, a couple that's past the honeymoon stage, that euphoric love that they once had? Where would you guide them? I mean, would you say like, best way, learn tantra, learn this new practice, or would you say they should develop their own, like, where would you guide them to go? Where should they begin?
Yeah. So I have seen that sacred sexuality is is a path that can allow a couple to stay deeply sexually engaged with one another, to fall in love in very profound ways, because it opens you up to intimacy, to truth, into energy states of ecstasy that are very profound. And instead of just relying on, the honeymoon period and the early stages, then you're invited to do the work and to take on the practices to have a depth of connection that actually feels like when you first met, but is now based on knowing each other very deeply, choosing each other very deeply. Doesn't necessarily mean, and I hesitate to indicate that a successful couple is a couple that stays together forever, but certainly for those of us in long-term relationships, having the ability to create those kinds of experiences, so important for us staying sexually connected and sexually activated. And I have seen that in my own partnership. I've seen that in many of my peer partnerships that are 10 to 20 years long. The people who are practicing sacred sexuality, people who are making pleasure practices a part of their life, they actually do have a rich sex life. That doesn't mean I don't resist Andrew sometimes, or we don't sometimes like not want to have sex with each other. Of course that happens, but there's a different depth and intensity to the sexual bond of long-term couples that practice sacred sexuality and tantra than I see in couples that don't. And it's almost like you get this gift from nature for the first year or two, but then after that, you have to do the work, right? Like you just in your early 20s, you get a gift from nature around health and well-being. And then when you hit your 30s and 40s and beyond, you better start going to the gym and eating well, because like you're not going to get that gift forever.
Yes, that's so true. And I was going to ask, oh yeah, I feel that so many, let's say the woman listening to this right now, they're really wanting to, have epic sex with their partner and create this legendary love. And they don't know how to approach their partner. Let's say they're seeking it, but their partner is, they haven't communicated it. And I know it's uncomfortable sometimes to communicate what you desire in your sex life with your partner. So how would you help women or a man listening to this right now, if they want to speak to their partner about it, how to create that container to, have this conversation, start having the conversation?
Yeah. So I really recommend that people institute a safe communication space in their relationship where they're not necessarily just talking about sex right off the bat. So the best practice that I know of that couples love, that we use all the time, is called fears, desires, and loves. So you spend 2 minutes on each topic, 2 minutes sharing your fears with each other. And you can find this on my website, on YouTube, things like that, if you want an audio download to guide you. So, I share 2 minutes talking about my fears. My partner shares 2 minutes talking about their fears. And then I share 2 minutes talking about what do I really want. They have 2 minutes talking about what they really want. And then we have 2 minutes each to talk about what we love about each other. And so what's really powerful is if you do this once or twice a week, and literally, it's funny, Andrew's always like, this is the favorite couples practice that Layla teaches. And I'm always like, that makes me feel like all of my like amazing, like ecstatic sexual technology is like not that amazing, because everyone just wants to talk to each other. But it's that kind of emotional intimacy is actually what people are craving. And it's the foundation of sexual and energetic and erotic intimacy. So doing that practice, even once a week, starts getting you talking to each other and talking to each other about things that maybe you don't usually talk about because you don't really take the time to share your fears. You want to take the time to share what you really, really want. And then to always finish it with what I love about you. It's like, it's not going and being like, I need this thing because it's not good enough. It's really like, I want to grow in this way because I want to have the deepest possible sex with you, right? Like I want to grow in this way because I crave to know more of you. And so it's a beautiful container in which you can start to share with each other in a safe way. And it starts to open up this conversation over time that allows you to really be able to articulate why you want it, why you're desiring it, what you're afraid of, right? It's so powerful to say, look, I'm afraid that if I ask for us to do tantra, I'm afraid if I ask us to try the sacred sexuality course that you're going to say no, right? Like it helps when you're having more comprehensive communication to really get these pieces across and to really share it in a way that is, practicing nonviolent communication. You're not doing this for me or this is going wrong, but really like, this is what I desire. This is how I feel. And I've seen that in most partnerships, when one partner does not make the other person responsible for their sexual awakening, but starts to engage in it and learn it and do it themselves, and holds a safe space for their partner to be able to understand and say yes, that more often than not, the partner actually does start to engage. Even the most resistant partners, even the partners that are like, no, that's weird. No, that sounds like a lot of work. No, I'm busy, blah, 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 blah. And the thing that I teach that I think is really important, my love coach, Annie Lala, actually shared this with me. She's amazing. And she shared that, there's usually a lag time between when one partner elevates and transforms and the other partner like gets it and follows along. Right. And the lag time is anywhere from 3 to 5 months. And that sounds like, maybe that could sound short sometimes, but when you're actually in it, being like, I really want you to get this thing, it actually feels like a really long time on the ground. And when I've really gotten that with Andrew, that when I embody something really deeply and take it on myself, if I give him 3 to 5 months, he almost always starts doing it himself, especially if I don't like harass him, belittle him, like judge him, all of that. He kind of gets it and comes along with me. And of course, there's a big fear in a lot of us that if our partner doesn't come along, it means the end of our relationship. And that's part of being courageous in relationship, right? Part of being courageous is to say, I'm going to follow my truth, come what may. And the vast majority of the time, I see that facilitates a depth and connection in couples. And in the times when it doesn't, no one's ever sad that they followed their truth, because if that actually dissolves the relationship, then like he didn't want to be in that relationship anyways.
I hear you. And I think that's beautifully said. And I think people that are going to tune into this podcast, this is one step, and you're obviously doing the work yourself. You're getting the knowledge. And if you implement certain practices that you say, that's you doing the work. And so, like you said, it's almost like be the influence to your partner. And usually that will, you don't want to coach them and you don't want to force them, but you want to influence them. And I think doing that naturally by your curiosity and taking the action steps to implement it into your life. And the other thing I was going to ask, what do you think is like the biggest mistakes that women or men make in having a satisfying sexual experience?
I definitely think holding ourselves back by feeling like we're going to be too much, because it's funny, like the vast majority of partners will say like, look, once I've had sex with like an activated woman who like practices sacred sexuality, like I cannot go back. Like there's no going back from that experience. Wow. Right. Like you can't go from someone who's like in touch with their emotions, like deeply feeling their pleasure, like anchored into themselves, knows themselves as a goddess, and then just be like, oh wow, like like a performative like person who's not connected in themselves, like no longer feels satisfying in the same way. So a lot of the time we tell ourselves this story because we've been sort of conditioned to believe this in society, that like, oh, if I open up my sexuality, I'm going to be too much. But that too much that we're afraid of as women is what the world craves. It's what people are hungry for. And so letting ourselves have that for ourselves first and foremost, and then also seeing how much it means to our partners is so incredibly powerful. I think a big mistake that I see women, everyone makes it, but I see women make it especially, is hiding behind, I am going to wait to be everything that I want to be until you are fully safe, you are fully evolved, you are fully X, Y, and Z. And there's this kind of like subtle victimization that happens because we've been conditioned to believe that our male partners should lead us if we are in partnership with a man, or our masculine partner should lead us. And I actually don't think this is true. I think whoever is the leader of consciousness in the relationship ends up leading that part of the relationship. So you might be the leader of consciousness in your relationship, and your partner might be the leader of other things, parenting, or the leader of finances, or the leader of intellectual, who cares who's the leader of what, but nobody's in a partnership where one partner, and especially not the male and masculine partner, is the leader of everything. Like that just doesn't exist. It's not true. And it's a subtle way that women really hold themselves back. And so if you are the leader of consciousness in your relationship, that means like you're the one pursuing the personal growth. You're the one wanting to try sacred sexuality. You're the one wanting to open up. It's not always the woman. but it oftentimes actually is in this particular domain. Like ask anybody who's a spiritual teacher who floods into the meditation courses, who floods into yoga, who's doing all of this, right? It's usually women. So let yourself lead in that way. Let yourself be an initiatress, and don't wait by saying like, well, my partner's not enough. My partner's X, Y, and Z. So like, I'm not going to breathe into my pussy, or like, I'm not going to try a jade or yoni egg. Let yourself be the initiatress and hold that anchor in that space in your relationship. And like I said, the vast majority of the time, your partner actually comes along with you much more if you embody it and choose it, rather than if you're sitting there being like, well, I'm not going to do it until you do it, or you say it's okay. That's a really big piece. And the other one is not learning to take deep self-responsibility for our emotions and our actions. There's still this like subtly conditioned desire to feel so safe with our partners, and partnership should be safe, but safety starts within how we hold ourselves, how we love ourselves, how we take responsibility for getting our own needs met internally first and foremost. And this to me is being a queen or royal sovereign of who we are. This to me is really looking at, if I want needs met, how do I internally love my inner child? How do I internally take care of my sexuality? How do I hold my heart in a beautiful way? And yes, I want to be in a partnership where my partner can meet me in that, where my partner can shower me with love, where my partner can be safe. But as long as I'm subtly saying, I won't feel safe until you make me feel safe. I won't feel like a wild, ecstatic sexual being until you make me feel like a wild, ecstatic sexual being. We're going to be locked in this sort of cycle forever. And the most insidious thing that thing does is it gives us an excuse to play small over a lifetime, because we're waiting for our partner to make us feel a certain way. We're waiting for our partner to choose a certain thing for us to give ourselves the permission. And I haven't seen that works. And B, the most successful partnerships I've seen, the leader of consciousness is owning their path and their truth, taking responsibility for that, and their partner is rising and meeting them. And then after that happens, we tend to rise each other and continue to meet each other. And that's how we get on an upward spiral of relating. But when we're sitting there saying, I'm not going to rise until you rise, what happens is we start actually going on a downward spiral.
Absolutely. And I have so many more questions, but I absolutely want to honor your time. And of course, what you just mentioned there, I would love if you could share your offerings for people to learn from you. I know you, of course, have your Vita coaching method program that so many people I've heard personally. I have 2 friends that did it or that are in it right now. So I know it's so powerful, and it's always full and sold out. So where can people learn more about your programs and learn more about how to really tap into their sexuality, sexual healing, and tantra, all the goodness you share today?
Thank you so much. Yeah. So if you go to laylamartin.com, there's all kinds of cool practices that you can find on the website, different guides that I've written. So there's like a selection if you want to learn orgasmic breathwork, or you want to learn sex magic, or you want to read something about, the couples practices that I've been talking about. You can go ahead and put your email address in, and that also signs you up for my email list, where you can find out more about my programs when they open up. And yes, we also have a weekly video that we send out. That's a training video that's totally for free. So you can start to learn and practice a lot of these things that I've been talking about, because we can talk about them as much as we want, and we don't get the transformation unless we do the practice. And from there, we have right now 2 programs, exactly as you've said. We have Vita Sex, Love, and Relationship Coaching Certification. So that opens up for enrollment in July every year. And it's a year-long program, and it professionally certifies you to be a sex, love, and relationship coach in the Vita methodology, which is a tantric approach to sex, love, and relationships. And then we have Vita Sacred Sexuality, which opens twice a year. And this is an initiation into these sacred sexual practices. So these are live practices that you can attend on virtually, or you can watch the replay. And again, it's an initiation into everything we've been talking about. So if you've been listening to this and being like, this sounds amazing, and how, that's what these programs do. They actually take you through the methodology so you can experience full body orgasms. You can have deeply ecstatic sex. So you can heal shame, guilt, and fear out of your sexuality. So you can have a deeper, more powerful relationship with your body, things like that. So yeah, if you want to make sure to not miss out on any of that, laylamartin.com.
Amazing. And also this is for couples too. You have a lot for couples as well.
Yes, we have programs for everybody, every gender, and for singles and couples.
And I heard you have over 9 million views on your YouTube channel as well, providing a lot of knowledge there.
Oh, we have over 125 million
Oh
views.
my goodness gracious. Yes. So yes, you're the queen, as they say, you're the headmistress of pleasure. So there's so much to learn from you. I could go on and on. But yes, I mean, this has been so valuable. And I'm sure everybody listening right now is a little bit more awakened, and your curiosity bubble has been popped. And so I will provide everything you just shared into the show notes. And yeah, it's so much goodness. Thank you, Layla, for all your knowledge, your expertise, and also providing us with the science and the background behind this tradition and why you're so passionate about it. So thank you for honoring the space and providing so much.
Thank you so much.